Hey, this week we have a lot of fun from distro hopping, looking at Ubuntu, talking about GNOME, talking about Pipewire, talking about AMD hip ray tracing, talking about a big speed up coming to Fuse, and giving the Cosmic Desktop a try. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 143, recorded Saturday, March 16th. It works Automagically. Hey, welcome. It is Saturday. You know what that means. It's time for Linux. It's time to get your geek on. Time to bring the nerds out. It's time to talk about Linux, and we're gonna have fun. Already having fun. It's gonna be a good show. It is, of course, not just me. Got the guys with me. Let me hit the right button so that we go to the three-way instead of the four-way. We've got Jeff, we've got Rob, and we've got some fun stuff to talk about. There's been some fun stuff that's happened this week, but a couple of big deal things that have happened this week. Let's see. So first off, we're going to go to Rob, and Rob is going to continue with his distro hopping ways. Who'd have thought?
And now it's time for another Distro Hopper's Corner. So I often preach that if you want to have a serious discussion about various distros, you have to have at least tried them out. So that's exactly what I've done. Now, I haven't gone all in and installed this as my daily driver, but I have tested it and played around with it on a virtual machine. So this distro I am going to talk about probably...
That looks like Windows.
It does, doesn't it?
That looks a lot like Windows.
Maybe I'm talking about Windows 11 here. But so what I am talking about here, it's probably not the kind of distro I would run as my daily driver, but since I know some of the other co-hosts on this panel really like the look of Windows Desktop. So I've decided to give Ubuntu a try, just for them. Also known as Windows Ubuntu 11.4.4. Now, I have no idea how this distro doesn't get sued out of existence by Microsoft. Microsoft sued Windows way back in the day. They did lose and all, but Windows had nothing on Ubuntu. For those watching, the display behind me here, that's Ubuntu, and it looks, like Jonathan said, almost exactly like Windows 7. It's ridiculous, and many aspects of it match as well. If I just click a couple things here, they got their store there. Obviously, that doesn't match Windows 11, I don't think. I guess I haven't used that. But many aspects of it look a lot like Windows 11. So the description on their website is, Ubuntu is an operating system based on Ubuntu LTS that has a similar appearance to Windows using the open source themes. Ubuntu also comes with a set of advanced tools called Power Tools that allows you to use features such as control panel and Windows-style network and general settings, Android emulation interface with video acceleration, synchronization with OneDrive, improved Wine capability for applications .exe and .msi, and is fully compatible with any hardware, they say. That sounds like a stretch to say any hardware, but they go on to say it does not require TPM, Secure Boot, POP CNT, or any other absurd requirements. Ubuntu is already shipped with Copilot, Edge, Teams, PowerShell, Skype, and so much more. I added the so in there. They just say and much more. So Ubuntu, it comes in two flavors you can choose from. They have the Plasma version that I think you guys would really like, Jonathan and Jeff. But it also has the Cinnamon version, and really they look very, very similar, slightly different tones of their colors. So they have their free edition, which is the one that I tried out, but they also have a $35 US edition. That will get you the professional version with the following key features. Windows-style control panel settings, Active Directory support made easy, access OneDrive directly through your file manager, support for Android subsystem with 3D acceleration and Play Store. That's something you don't even get in Windows 11. You don't get the Play Store. And that's another thing I don't know how they're not going to get sued with. But in a year, you're not going to have any Windows subsystem for Android on Windows. So this might be the place to be. Also, continuing on, improve support for MS Windows applications through Wine, update and improvement of MS Windows themes, direct support with developers, and access to new professional versions of Ubuntu. And so in conclusion, I'm not recommending Ubuntu. Something about it just feels a little sketchy. Maybe it's just because it looks like Windows. But if you have a need for your Windows desktop to look almost exactly like Windows 11, maybe for spousal approval factor, I don't know, take a look at Ubuntu. Or they also say that you will soon be able to use Power Tools on your favorite KDE or Cinnamon desktop. So Jonathan will be able to install this pretty soon on his Fedora, his KDE Plasma Fedora desktop.
I'm okay.
No.
I'm okay without doing that. So it's something. It's not for me, but it's something. It's out there.
I just thought, I mean, you're a big KDE fan, so you really like that Windows look.
My KDE desktops don't act or look a whole lot like Windows. You can make them look however you want to, and they really don't.
That's the best thing about KDE is just the configurability, though.
Yeah, it really is.
You can make it look like Windows or something else.
So it's funny. Microsoft has their own Linux version now, and they just renamed it. It used to be CBO Mariner. Now it's Azure Linux. And that actually happened about a week and a half ago, to 10 or 12 days ago. And this is trying so much harder to be Microsoft than the actual Microsoft Linux is. It's hilarious.
Yeah, maybe
I don't think they're even going to go after these guys, because with Ubuntu, I don't think Windows really cares anymore. I mean, you can still install Windows for free now. They've kind of just, the desktop is more, we got to keep the momentum going and than anything else.
But maybe they should hire these guys for their Azure Linux.
No, probably not. I don't think we want Azure Linux to be that. All right, so that's one distro hop. There's another distro that people might want to hop to, and that's because of a really interesting new installation option. Jeff, what is up with Ubuntu?
So in more Ubuntu 24.04 news, the coming LTS is going to support installs with NVMe over TCP drives. That means there's going to be initial support for the server installer, which will be able to handle the root file system setup on NVMe over TCP when the drive is remote. So let me kind of break this down a little here. So the NVMe over TCP is an extension over the NVMe protocol over TCP networks, which allows for extended storage infrastructure while scaling using standard Ethernet between NVMe OF hosts and NVMe OF controllers on the network. So lots of talk saying that with this protocol, you can have large pools of remote storage that can be shared between many different machines. By having a central pool, not only does it allow faster sharing of data across servers, it lets you have less memory and total throughput of a day. Sorry. See this, we take this show the first time, so you don't get edited polished. This is a real deal here.
Live to tape.
Live to tape. So it lets you have less memory total throughout a data center because the machines only grab what they need it and when they need it and release it back when they're done. You know, assuming you have workloads that can grow and shrink like that. You know, it won't work in all cases if you have very static, large memory uses and you don't ever free it up. But now, even stepping back a little more from that, NVMe OF stands for NVMe over Fabrics, and it's for non-volatile memory, so this is not for RAM. And Fabrics means networking fabrics, as the protocol can be over Ethernet, fiber channel, and other networking standards. Mm-hmm. Now, I won't go deeper into a deep dive of NVMe OF, but there are many papers out there talking about it for those that are curious, and I'll leave that research to the listener. Back to Linux, the kernel already supports NVMe over TCP, but this change is specifically for the installer. I do want to point out this is for their server installer and not the normal desktop installer. Yet, anyway, it's kind of there was a lot of yets in there, so maybe we'll see it on the desktop installer, but that's down the road. Initial support allows for the root file system to be on a remote drive, but the /boot and /boot EFI will still need to be on the local machine. The code is all merged in and was an exception to the feature freeze for the 24.04 coming out. Because this is so new, treat it more like a beta and don't instantly figure you can deploy your server fleet with this new feature. So from the comments from the merge, they said for 2404, the ability to discover remote block services using NVMe TCP is out of Subiquiti's scope. Therefore, the ability to install NVMe TCP drives is a feature invisible to 99% of our users. One way to make the feature visible, provided that NVMe TCP drives are accessible on the network, is to run the specific NVMe connect or NVMe connect-all commands using the NVMe CLI package. This can be done using auto install early commands or by spawning a debug shell in Subiquity. So the NVMe TCP work in Subiquity is also a work in progress. Now, this is from the actual Ubuntu people saying this, and it's advertised as experimental in Curtain. Curtain is Curt installer. If a regression is introduced when adding the ability to install with root on a remote drive, the users could still play around with the old behavior by changing root to /home. So this has been supported for /home for a while. It's just the allowing the root drive to be remote is the new part of this. So if this interests you, take a look at the article in the show notes to have the full details on how to make this work. You will have to have a. Oh, sorry, I had a technical difficulty here. So take a look at the show notes. It'll give you all the details if you really want to see how this works, and it will. There is a little bit of setup, but if you're in that server space, I think this could be a neat feature for you.
So Aaron is asking in the chat, like, what is this for? Is this ephemeral storage? He's still trying to get his head around it. And I think that essentially what we're talking about is something resembling PXE boot, or you could probably actually use it with PXE boot. And just instead of using NFS for your root, you would use NVMe, which probably is faster. I would hope it's faster.
Yeah, it's because you can run fiber channel or full network Ethernet, so you could have 100 gigabit, and it's a quicker way to deploy huge farms of servers.
Yeah, so the one of the other ways you could do this is like one of the other technologies that does this is iSCSI over the network, which has been around for a while. But SCSI is kind of showing its age. That's, when I say a while, that's been around for a long time. So NVMe is going to be, just generally speaking, a simpler interface than something like SCSI. So yeah, I'm sure if it's not quicker, it's at least more maintainable.
I wonder if there's any use case for high availability. Maybe if you don't have a full system that would support it, if there's some kind of tool set that they could come up with that could utilize that, if it could make any aspect of it easier.
Yeah, I don't know. High availability file systems is sort of a dark art. It's black magic, man. It's
and maybe this can make it easier.
Maybe, I don't know, but you've still got to have the magic under there somewhere. For those who don't know, high availability, what we're talking about is generally the way you do it is it's a virtual machine that's multi-home, it's running on two servers at the same time. And if one of those servers goes down, the other one keeps going, and then you could bring the other server back up, and it'll automagically keep everything synced. You can do hardware upgrades by taking one of the servers down out from underneath it, do whatever you need to the hardware, bring it up, and then it'll go back and auto sync everything across. High availability it's amazing when you have it working right, but it is complicated. And I agree, it would be nice to have something that would make it easier. I'm not sure if this would or not. I don't know if it solves any of those magical problems.
Yeah, quite often when you're doing high availability, you do have shared storage, but it's at the hypervisor level.
Yeah, because you've got to have shared storage, but that shared storage itself has to have syncing capabilities. It's got to keep that shared storage on both physical servers. And again, I'm just using this very simple example where you have two servers and one VM. It's got to have that shared storage. It's got to exist on both servers, and it has to keep itself synced between those two servers and be able to recover from desyncs. So I mean, there's when I say magic, there's a lot going on there.
I'm pretty sure what I've seen is a single storage array, and then the servers are both utilizing that same.
I would argue that's not very good high availability, but okay, I see what you're saying. That is a little simpler.
That's like how VMware does it where you can what do they call it? There's a name for it when you can move stuff like almost instantly, and that's also like Proxmox too. Same thing. For Proxmox, you need to have a shared storage. Yeah, so you could use this for doing things like live migration. Would be pretty trivial. It would definitely be useful for that. The installer lets you use it. So that's almost certainly going to be one of their use cases. Yeah. I don't know that I would call that high availability though.
I don't know about high availability, but one of the things too is just like if you had a fleet of blank machines, you only need to load on the boot and the boot EFI, and you could use the remote root to install to your machine. So you would after you install, your root is then on your local machine. So it's not always just remotely booting. It's part of just the install process. But as I was saying, alone, it wouldn't be high availability. You would need some software to manage that, which for this use case doesn't exist today. Yeah. I don't know. Somebody might start playing around with it and try to come up with something, I suppose. But a quick little snippet, this NVMe over TCP, it seems like it's turning out to be a pretty cool technology. I think I've really only heard of it recently within the past year, several months, but I saw a how-to clone a drive because somebody did not want to open their system up, take it out, and do that. So there's a how-to clone one system over to another system using the NVMe over TCP. Oh, cool. So that's neat. I like that. If you're interested, look for it. If you find it again, throw it in the show notes. I think that'd be really interesting to look at. All right. Well, let's talk about cameras and Pipewire and OBS. This is sort of a follow-up on one of the stories we talked about last week, and it is a blog post from Christian Schaller, who is involved with the Pipewire development. And he talks about there is now Firefox with Pipewire camera support. OBS just shipped an update that has Pipewire camera support. And that is using Pipewire to import video, live video, the same way that we've done with audio for a while now. You can actually use Pipewire to bring video in to these different programs. And it's one of the things that they talk about here that I agree is very neat is now the patch bay applications like Helvum and QPW Graph. There's actually something you could do with the video side of those now. There's actually video to throw around, which is pretty cool to see. And then he says Pipewire support is also paired with camera portal support.
And the use of the portal means that they are also getting closer to being able to fully sandbox media applications inside of Flatpaks, which that's actually one of the reasons why Pipewire exists in and of itself. So one of the things to understand here is something called libcamera. And to understand libcamera, you also have to understand V4L2. It's Video for Linux 2. That is the subsystem that I think probably at this point still most webcams and camera capture devices use to make your video feed accessible to programs. But there's kind of this new class of webcam that uses libcamera, and it doesn't get exposed necessarily as a V4L2 device. Libcamera works well with this video stuff inside of Pipewire. And so one of the things that they're doing now, and this now works inside OBS, it works inside Firefox, is you can, and I think they're defaulting to, I don't remember if they're defaulting to libcamera or if they're allowing you to choose between the two, because a lot of devices now are accessible in both ways through libcamera and V4L2. But when you go to grab something using Pipewire, you can choose, and it'll give you the option now to grab the device using libcamera. So there's this new, as they say, the new generation of MIPI cameras, particularly in laptops, that are now going to be accessible again. And that is neat to see. And then one more thing is Pipewire 1.0.4 just released quite recently. And we talked about it a little bit last week, but the FireWire support did indeed get fixed up in it. And it is something that I've not gotten a chance to play with yet, but definitely want to, because I've got the old FireWire card over there that could use some love. So some neat stuff coming for Pipewire. And I'm still looking forward to a couple more things landing in OBS. And then soon as let's see, what are the things that need to happen in OBS? The Pipewire video out needs to land in OBS. And then the, what do they call it? I want to say MIPI and MAPI, but it's essentially video direct over HTML. And I think the output works, but the input does not work. But anyway, as soon as those things land in OBS, then it's going to be able to talk directly to Video Ninja. And I'm no longer going to have two invisible copies of Chromium running behind OBS. I'm looking forward to it because I know they're there and they drive me crazy.
using up your memory too.
Yes. Memory and CPU cycles, adding latency. Goodness.
Well, would the next step after that be that if we're all running OBS, they would just talk directly and you wouldn't even need video?
That is actually something that's potentially in the cards. I don't know if that will work with doing many to many. There may still need to be video in there, but maybe, I don't know. Once it all lands, we'll sit down and play with it and see what we can do, what we can make happen.
Yeah, we would just have to pipe it to you, and then we could watch the feed in the Discord.
The problem with that is you'd have so much latency, though.
Yeah, you're right.
It'd be a lot. So, and the way the video does it now is so all three of us, we each pipe to each other, and so we're all interconnected, and that's how we're able to have a conversation without talking over each other too terribly badly. Fun stuff. All right, Rob, did you distro hop again? You did, didn't you?
Kind of.
How many distros have you hopped through this week?
I think it's just these two.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the other one. What's it?
Yeah, I could have seen a goal to go through the top 100 at Distro Watch.
That would in a week. 100 distros.
No,
I don't. Okay. I was going to say I don't know if you would actually have time. If you may have to have more than one machine to have time to do all those installs.
I'm thinking long-term goal.
Okay. I could see that. Anyway, Rob, tell us about Cosmic.
All right. So, yeah, as you pointed out, I really could have squeezed this into my distro hoppers corner, but then what else would I have to talk about today? So, we have been talking for some time on the show about System 76 developing the new desktop environment built on Rust that they are calling Cosmic. They initially planned for the first alpha release of Cosmic to come out this month or by the end of this month, but they aren't quite ready yet and are now expecting a release in May, but still aiming for a stable release this year. But you don't have to wait to install it if you want to give it a try. I wouldn't recommend running on production yet, unless you don't mind some bugs here and there and missing features and settings. Settings, for example, for those watching, here's what the sound spot looks like. Output to do, everything's to do. Is like, but they still have a lot of the settings are in here, so you can play with a lot of things and still use a lot of the stuff, but some things are still missing, but not a whole lot. So yeah, as those watch, you could see I installed Pop OS. I did this again on a virtual machine, and the first thing I have to say about it is, it even seems nicer. Well, Pop OS alone seems nicer since I've tried it in the past. It was okay, I thought, but Pop OS was pretty nice. But that wasn't why I installed Pop OS. So after a quick look around, I quickly moved on and I followed the steps on GitHub. I can't remember if I put them in the show notes. The GitHub, if I haven't, I will add that. But it's actually really simple to get this up and going on Pop OS at least. So I followed the steps, got the new Cosmic desktop environment running. And the Cosmic developers, they recently completed work on hybrid graphics support. The minimize and restore of Windows works, which I could see that all works here. And the tiling applet, for those watching, there is a tiling applet here, so you can quickly access it and adjust how you want to tile things. And the input device settings are new too. As I was watching, the sound settings need to be adjusted. So I figured I probably shouldn't go all in and use that for the show because sound is kind of important. Though I did play around and discover you could, if you go into the command line, you can open up the GNOME version and I could still play with the sound. And also there's like the greetings menu for those watching here. If I log out and confirm, they have a new, if that ever shows up here. Yeah, so the greetings menu here is different too.
Ooh, fancy.
That's part of their thing. You can pick the other things here. I only tried to pick one of these other things once and it didn't do anything. And after that, I couldn't get back into Cosmic until I rebooted the thing. So
whoops,
that was like a bug too. It's like, this was all just, my password was gone and I couldn't even do anything. So, there's definitely bugs. I think they even say don't report the bugs yet. But if you want to take it for a spin and play around, it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm curious how many of their promises, the things that they talked about really wanting to get done, how many of those will they manage to hit? Because they said, "Oh, we'll do HDR and do everything Rust based and a couple of other things." And I don't know if there's any HDR support yet. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think they'll hit it. It might just take a little longer than they think because some of this stuff is, HDR, how hard could it be? And then you get in the details and they go, oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think once you log out, the Cosmic greeter just doesn't log back in again. So I just tried to log back in and I don't think it matters what you pick. It just doesn't work funny. After the first one. So
turns out desktop managers are hard too. Oh well. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'll have to try it. I'll have to give it a spin. I'll put it on this laptop when it finally comes out. Take a look at it.
There's only a few commands to run. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. Sounds like it. All right. Jeff Intel did something else that's open source. A What is it? What is a continuous profiler? What are we talking about here?
Well, I should preface this. Now, this is going to be, again, this is more the server end of the spectrum, so bear with me here. But I thought it was pretty interesting. So, it's been it's been a little bit since we've gave some love to Intel. So I thought the story was, not only, hey, it's a little different, we can give Intel some love, and I thought it was kind of interesting. So Intel is taking their continuous profiler open source. Probably self-explanatory, but continuous profiler was developed by Intel Granulate for aiming to help boost CPU performance. Asaf Ezra, general manager of Intel Granulate, said this, and this is a quote, "Continuous profiler has been at the heart of what we've been doing at Intel Granulate. By helping developers identify bottlenecks in the code, business can optimize their applications more easily and effectively. Continuous profiler delivers a flame graph of the hottest code paths, meaning showing you where the highest resource usage of the CPU is. And it can automate the task of finding the bottlenecks in your code. And as your CPUs change, your code can be tested against different CPUs to see if the bottlenecks change. So as they change the architecture in the hardware, it could change where your code gets hung up. And the continuous profiler will be able to help solve that problem. The program started out as gprofiler and has morphed into what it is today. It combines multiple sampling profilers to produce a unified virtualization of what a CPU is spending time on. You can then navigate the graphs, get better idea where the issues are located. So you can filter on services, you can filter based on container name, host name, Kubernetes deployment object by simply selecting the resolution you want to see within the platform. So the profiler is compatible with Intel's Granulate's continuous optimization services and can be deployed cluster-wide within minutes, supporting a range of programming language without requiring code changes. So again, I should make this clear, when they say platform, they mean CPU, and it's just a profile that only the CPU, because in their marketing, sometimes they'll talk platform, but they mean CPU. And the profiler is SOC2 certified, so there's a high level of trust that the data you're collecting isn't going to run away. SOC2 is a certification that your data's integrity is going to be there. It's not going to just be spread throughout the internet. There are future plans on this to make the interface simpler and more friendly, and they'll be adding features for unique developer needs and try to optimize the software more. If you look at the link in the show notes, you'll see the link to the Intel announcement, and you'll also find the GitHub link. Now, again, for anybody who wants to install this, I want to say this isn't for the average PC. For example, in the GitHub, they list the prerequisites as you have to have an AWS account and configure your credentials as a project utilizes AWS, SQS, and S3. You also need to create an SQS queue and an S3 bucket. You have Docker and Docker Compose installed on your machine. So bottom line, this is a more industrial program, but if it's up your alley and looks like you might have an exciting toy to play with to really nail down the most optimized code path.
Now, I'm still trying to figure out, is this for a single application or is it for everything on a CPU? And along with that, is this showing what processes are using your CPU, or is it actually going down into code paths and what routines?
Yes, all the above. Okay, because it's multiple profilers. It's packaging into one, and then you tune it. You can filter it based on what you want to see. How specific do you want to get? So, and then if this does what I think it does, which let me tell you what I think it does, you tell me if I'm right or not, it will let you say, okay, everything on this server I want to watch. I want to see which applications my server CPU is spending time on. And then inside of those applications, I want to see what code paths it is spending time on. What functions are the hot functions? And I want to be able to see this on multiple different applications at the same time. Is that what it's doing? Yes.
That's really cool.
or you could just say, I only want to see it on this specific application, and it creates those flame graphs to basically overlay all the usage, so you can then drill in and find out what exact bottleneck you've got in any or all of your code paths.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool.
That's really cool. I also see on their GitHub that there is instructions for doing more self-hosted. So apparently, if you really want to dive into it, there are ways to get it running without all the AWS stuff.
Yeah, but that's pretty, I mean, if you're at that level, you probably already know how to use AWS.
Well, it's true, but sometimes it's nice to not have to.
True.
I think Rob is muted, which is why we keep talking over him.
That's the first time I tried to talk, but
okay.
You can get S3 buckets other places. It's almost more like a protocol that other places mimic.
Yeah, and basically, bottom line was, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that this wasn't a, hey, I'm just going to throw it on my normal desktop PC and run it and see, it's not going to be like a normal.
I still might.
I think that's a good story for you to work on between all the distro hopping there, Rob.
There are some problems you run into during development that something like this would be really useful. So I've not worked on it in a long time, but one of the projects I used to work on was FWNOP. It was a firewall tool. And on some systems, having it on burned a lot, way too much system cycles. And the money dried up to be able to work on it is really what happened. But I was pretty sure that what was going on is that it was actually making too many calls to firewall D via the firewall CMD command, which was in and of itself taking a long time to return and using a bunch of cycles. And so a tool like this would actually be really useful to be able to see those things side by side. Like, what is my binary doing that is then causing the system to waste a bunch of cycles? So I could see, even for during development, that being super handy.
Well, especially where it's not language based. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, I've written things like, I was writing a compiler one time, and it was kind of a unique piece of software, but I was running it through it was written in Python, mm-hmm. and with some libraries in C to speed things up. But there was, like, for example, a Python profiler that you could run that would tell you exactly where things were taking the longest.
Except it couldn't handle the C code. Didn't know what to do with that.
Yep. And it was only for that program, and it was where this is kind of will let you, it's much more powerful to be able to see, oh, hey, Rust over here is really bogging me down, or hey, why is this Java creating a hiccup here? And
very cool.
It's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, that could be really useful. I think so. All right, I've got yet another one of these. Hey, it's open source now, stories, and it's from AMD, Team Red, and it's AMD HIP RT. And so that is the heterogeneous compute interface for portability. That's the HIP, and then RT stands for ray tracing. And I believe this is something that AMD promised quite some time back that they were going to open source. Well, it is now open. It is now available. And it's not open in the same way we talked about a week or two ago, where it's like, there's a GitHub repo and they have the binaries up on GitHub. That makes it open source. No, it's actually, the source code is out there for this one. But it essentially, it's an open source library for doing ray tracing, adding ray tracing to an engine. And I find that really fascinating that they did that. Of course, it's built on HIP, so it's built on AMD technology. It's going to work on AMD. I would be really, really fascinated to see one of the open source games or game engines add this, or maybe do the same thing that Quake RTX does with some of the other engines and do ray tracing there. I think that would be really fun to see. But yeah, they talk about their features. There's ray triangle intersections and ray custom primitives and ray masks, bounding volume hierarchy options, load and store BVH, and even motion blur. Yay. But no, it's real fascinating that they made this open source. And like I said, I'm hoping some developers pick it up and run with it. I don't know, maybe you get to see it added to emulators, right? Like playing your old favorite N64 games, or maybe one of the N64 decompilation projects, where somebody's taken, let's say, Perfect Dark, decompiled it back to C code. How difficult would it be to add something like this into that engine? I think that'd be a lot of fun.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm curious to see where it goes. Now, wasn't there also one that runs on a CPU that was just released?
I'm not
as well
sure.
Because at first I thought it was this, and I was looking at the article. I'm like, oh no, this is GPU.
Is that a ray tracing engine particularly?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I haven't seen that one.
Because it would do ray tracing on CPUs, but it wasn't super fast. It wasn't like you were going to play Cyberpunk on it, because the CPUs didn't have enough horsepower to give you high frame rates. But there were other thoughts and uses to it, for like, say, more Blender or other things that were rendering that.
Somebody did release a ray tracing engine. I know what you're talking about now. I don't remember the exact story, but it does sound familiar.
Yeah, it was like a week, 2 weeks ago. I mean, it was just very recently. It seems like it.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll be able to find it here in just a moment, but that does sound very familiar, and I don't remember who it was or what the detail was. So it wasn't a real time ray tracing engine. It was more like
but it like if you were playing a game, like I want to say Quake, they were running it and it was like 10 frames per second or something like that. Or, I mean, it was real time, but not practical real time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't quite remember the story either. We'll come up with it. Somebody will tell us. We'll try to remember to put it in the show notes. Let's talk about Proton Mail. We haven't talked about this for a while. I don't know if we've ever talked about Proton Mail on the show.
I don't know.
Rob, what's Proton Mail? This is one of those times where I ask a question. I know what the answer is, but we're going to let Rob answer. What's Proton Mail?
So I'm not a Proton Mail user, but I often hear recommended in the Linux community as an excellent email provider. So when I first saw that they now have a desktop app for Linux, I had to check it out. So to get into, for those who don't know what Proton is, a quick synopsis of them, what they do is they are a privacy-focused company formed by a group of scientists and engineers who met working at CERN circa 2014. The company provides a wide range of secure, privacy-focused online services, including encrypted email, VPN, and cloud storage. So up until now, the email's only been through the web-based app, and you miss out on some features, obviously, when you don't have that desktop integration. And encryption's probably about the same, but overall, the pros of the desktop app, and also let me just show it for those who are watching, because I did try it out here. I got myself a Proton email. Feel free to email me there. I don't know that I'm going to keep it. So, but I don't mind if you guys want to spam that mailbox, go for it.
Just sign up for all the shady services using that email address.
It's only there for testing purposes. So the pros of the desktop app, you get the same great webmail features as before, but you get OS integrations, including native desktop notifications, light dark mode support, and the optional ability to use system fonts. And what really drew me in is, from the screenshot that I saw, and those can see it on here. Personally, I think every email client on Linux, and almost like every email client out there anywhere, just doesn't look great. It's like they were developed in the 90s and just never really prettied them up and made them modern and beautiful, like every other app out there. So that was the first thing that really caught my eye. I thought it looked beautiful, modern. You can download the app as a deb or an RPM. I installed this on Ubuntu, so it's a deb. I use the deb version. But you can also get it for Windows and Mac. I guess technically, officially speaking, the Linux version is beta. They still say, but I don't know. I don't know what could not be that functional, since I am pretty sure it's just an Electron app, or at least some other web-based wrapper. But from what I read, the Electron stuff seems to be there. So that brings me to the first thing on the downsides. If you think it's a downside, at least it is an Electron app, which kind of just shows their webmail interface, which, it's not that bad. They kind of use up a lot more resources than a fully native app, but it still works well. And then also, if you only have a free Proton email account, you're not going to be able to use this app, at least not for long. You can get a 14-day free trial to test it out, which is what I did, which is why, for those watching, you can see a big thing up here that says upgrade. So that's unfortunate. But after that, you're going to need to get a paid account. And that's kind of the cons of it, but also maybe a con for me. I was since I'm not a Proton Mail user, I was really just hoping it was a regular email client. I knew it wasn't going to be. I could expect that, but I was really just hoping I could install this app and just use it with any email service. But, it makes sense. It's kind of for their service, promoting their service. But then again, Microsoft has Office 365 Outlook, and that doesn't just work with their email service. It works with any. So why not? Anyway,
Proton, yeah. So Proton is doing more than just, honestly, they're doing more than just email. They're doing email, but it's email plus some extra features on top of it. So for those that are not familiar with it, I'm pretty sure Proton is the email service that Edward Snowden used to set up his escape. They are, when you say they are privacy focused, that's almost putting it mildly. They are privacy focused to the point of being almost paranoid. And they've got encryption and some other things built into the application. And so that's why it's not just another email app. They're doing like public private encryption under the hood automatically on all of your emails. So there is some extra fancy stuff going on. And I think that's probably also why it's still in beta, is because they really care about getting the security right. And so that is their way of saying it's not fully vetted. We're not 100% sure. We're not quite ready to stand behind it confidently. We're still working on the security bit of it, trying to make sure that is nailed down. Yeah.
It's that's kind of what it's all about, being encrypted and secure.
Yeah.
So if you do want that, I believe their lowest plan was it like $465, or maybe it's $565 US. But with that, you can use your own domain and not have a proton.me. You get more storage. Because with the free, you only get 1 gig of storage, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
The free one's pretty limited, but you can get a feel for it. But with the cheapest paid account, you get more storage. You get your own. You can use your own domain, and I don't remember what else, but all the features you'd expect.
Makes sense
from a professional grade email service.
Cool. All right, let's see what's up next. Krita. Jeff, Krita 2024. Now, remind me, what is Krita? What is it about?
Well, Krita has released a roadmap for 2024. And for anyone who doesn't know, Krita is a professional level free and open source paint program. It's very popular not only in Linux, but a couple other operating systems that I'm not sure anybody cares anything about besides Rob.
Exactly.
They start out by talking about some challenges they've had. So they're kind of review the year before, and they've had issues, such as the maintainer of the Android and Chrome OS port of Krita has become too busy to work on the program full time and had to step down. And because KDE has retired their binary factory and moved binary builds to invent.kde.org, their continuous integration system, they don't have automatic builds for Android anymore. They also lost another sponsor developer. They were sick for quite a while, but recently blogged that they've decided to move to a new job. So they worked on maintaining the libraries for Krita, and they were really good at upstreaming fixes, so they're going to be missed. So, a couple hurdles to jump over there. In the announcement, they also go over what they were able to do last year, but we've covered that in the show before and throughout the year. So if anybody's curious, there is a link in the show notes so you can go get the full details. Now, looking forward to the future here, top of the heap is porting Krita to Qt6. So KDE has released their first version of frameworks for Qt6, and that is the path going forward. So they're going to have to port. The developer says, and this is their quote, "This is a big project, not just because of disappearing functions, but pretty much because of the changes to the support for GPU rendering. All in all, it's pretty likely that porting the Qt6 will take a lot of the time away from us implementing fun new features. But when that's done, we can also start working on a tablet-friendly user interface, provided we can still release Krita for Android." They are going to try to fill those positions that were opened up by those other two that have left. Besides the porting, they do have a list of changes they do want to get done. So, like, implement a system to create flexible text balloons and integrate that with the text object so the text flows into the balloons. Provide a new layer type for comic book frameworks. Provide integration with Blender, though they do say this is less urgent since there is a third-party plugin for that called Blender Layer, and they say it works pretty well, so the integration will be low on the list, at least for now. They want to replace the current Docker system with something more flexible and maintained. They want to implement a system to provide tool presets, create new user interfaces for handling palettes, add an animation audio waveform display, and add support for animation reference frame workflow. There were other things they want to add as well. I was just kind of hitting some of the high points there. They are also discussing using GPU to improve performance. There's some disagreement on where the real slowdown is. Is it brushes versus the transform tool versus filters? So there's some investigation going on there to see where the best speed improvement is if they use the GPU to improve performance. There's a developer who's actually going to list doing benchmarking and whatnot to list it all out, and they'll figure out where they can make the most improvement. Of course, it wouldn't be 2024 without mentioning AI, which there's some heated discussions going on with the developers and the artists. The short of it is the artists feel generative AI is worthless and would lead to bland, repetitive templates, but assistive AI could be useful. One thing that everybody agreed on is they won't use anything that uses models trained on scraped images. So that means they're not going to grab stuff from the internet and train it on that. They'll have their own data set that they themselves have. We'll see what 2024 will bring for Krita, and they do mention they are probably not going to get everything on the list because the porting is going to take up a lot of the work this year. So we'll keep an eye on it, though, see how it goes as they progress through the year and how they fill the spots that have been vacated. So take a look at the article in the show notes and the link to the Krita site announcement. And if you have thoughts, please drop by the Discord and let us know what you think.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Neat to see people working with AI and trying to do it a little circumspectly. Let's put it that way. There are definitely issues with the way some of the companies out there are just grabbing everything and throwing it into the engine with the assumption that throwing it through an AI engine removes the copyright from it.
So much of that too. And I've had this discussion with people, a lot of the problems, and especially I kind of agree with a lot of people where large language models right now are not not the end all be all, because kind of garbage in, garbage out. I mean, how much stuff on the internet do you see that's just garbage that's getting sucked in to train some of these AIs? And it's like, not.
It depends what you're using it for. I did a huge chunk of my comments on my performance reviews this year using ChatGPT, and it was amazing. I mean,
but that's where I would see it more as assistive.
Yeah, it was a fancy Grammarly. You know, I typed out what I want. I was like, geez, I got too many ands there, and that reads kind of funny. Let me just see how ChatGPT would rewrite this. and it did such a great job sometimes. And I know we brought this up before, how sometimes it does some really a lot of big words and stuff. And it did do that the first time. And I don't remember what I said. I said something like, make it less complex or something like that, or use smaller words, or I don't remember what I said, and then it came back again with like language that I would use. So, but I want to say about Krita also, one of the things that caught my attention was that they wanted to provide better tablet support. And then you went on to say, providing they can still they'll develop for Android, which, why is that a prerequisite? Because Linux, I run Linux on a tablet. It's not only Android.
Well, one of the things they were calling out was they were, so that was from them themselves mentioning that. Now, they did mention that Android was a big part of a lot of their tablet stuff. I mean, not because you got to remember they're popular across Mac and Windows as well. So Linux is not their only focus. So I think they were just kind of assuming tablets means Android,
and they're wrong.
And well, yeah, and they did mention they were having problems with Android just because their interface has changed so much. It's hard to keep up with the Android.
I mean, Windows is on tablets. So I mean, Mac OS is like the only one that's not on a tablet, unless you go over to iOS, which probably isn't a whole lot different to develop for, but
yeah, it's the same stuff underneath. So. Yeah, I don't know. I've never really been much of a Krita user, probably because I don't have any real particular skills in that area of art. So that would be why. You know, I am skilled at drawing in the same way that Randall Munroe is, and that's the XKCD creator. All of my drawings are stick figures. He's really my hero for leaning into that. I think it's great.
It says that we all can be artists, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my level as well. But so, definitely take a look at the show notes and look at the link, and they go into some of the Android stuff a little more, and there were some other hiccups they had through the year that they talk about in there. So there's stuff I've left out just to make the story somewhat brief.
Yep. All right, let's talk about Fuse. This one is pretty cool. I'm excited about this. So the file system, that's the Fuse, that's the file system for user space. And a lot of things live there. And historically, Fuse file systems have been slow, terribly slow. One of the reasons is because Fuse is a user space daemon. So you have, whatever your application is, talks to the kernel, which then talks back to user space, which then talks back to the kernel to be able to make things happen. Essentially, it's file system drivers that exist outside the kernel, which is great in some cases, because you can update your file system or your file system driver without updating your kernel. You don't have the security issues of that file system driver happening in the kernel. There are some advantages to it, but it's slow. There's been a thing that has existed in Android for quite a while now, and that is the Fuse pass-through. We've got 2 links for this topic in the show notes. The second one is off to source.android.com talking about the Fuse pass-through. And there is a series of images there of drawings. And about the third one down, it talks about fuse pass-through requests. And it is this same thing that I just described, where you have your app talks down through into the kernel layer through VFS, talks to the fuse driver, goes back up to the fuse daemon, back down to the file system, and then finally gets to where it's going. And with fuse pass-through, you can now skip about half of that, because what it can do is it can set up, essentially it sets up permissions for the file. So it checks and says, do we have permissions for this file? Yes or no? And if yes, it continues on. And then after that, it doesn't have to bounce back through the daemon. It just goes straight to the kernel, which makes everything a lot faster. Michael Larrable from Phoronix, of course, was on this and did, I believe this is his, I'm not sure if this is his benchmarks or someone else, but as shown in last month's article, benchmarks on earlier versions of the fuse pass-through. Yes. This is his benchmarks from about a month ago. And so on, these are amazing. The megabytes per second on a read on native was 1,839. When you went down to fuse, it dropped to a terrible 471 megabytes per second. But fuse pass-through is 1,791. So essentially like a 4 times speed up over regular fuse. On writes, it went from 1322 down to 95. And with pass-through turned on, it went from 95 up to 1,068. So like a 10 times speed up. So essentially what this is going to do is it's going to make fuse usable and not just toy file system drivers. Fuse is pretty slow, and now it's going to be pretty fast. The reason this is news right now is it just got added to kernel 6.9. And I believe it's on by default too. So Fuse file systems 6.9 onwards is going to get a lot faster and a lot more usable. And it's cool. It's going to be really good. It's going to be good for for a lot of different things, but like I think some of the NTFS file systems are fuse based, and there's a few other places where you do a lot of fuse. It'll probably help. Actually, it'll probably help speed up snaps.
I was going to say, isn't snaps fuse?
I think so.
Yeah, and it's used a lot of places. There's a lot of like on the fly conversions type stuff that it's also used for. Fuse is big in Linux.
Yeah.
I'll have to try my benchmarks again then once after this is out and see if that actually brings snap up to as speedy as everything else.
Yeah, no, the question is whether the snap fuse driver is going to be able to use this, or if they have to do a lot of work to make it able to use this. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. It could be pretty cool.
I think they'll use it, maybe not initially, but we have that person that Canonical hired to bring snaps up to speed. So
I'm sure they're looking at it.
Sooner or later, we'll see it.
Only makes sense if they really want to push them.
Yeah, we looked, one of the last times we talked about Fuse, we looked at the whole list of Fuse drivers. There's a bunch of them. There's like 100 different drivers, and it gets used in places you wouldn't necessarily think of. I think Docker uses it as well, and some other systems. It gets used a lot. So it'll be neat. It'll be just a all around win, I think, for this to start working better.
Yeah, there was a story that I did maybe a year ago on it where I mounted a virtual MP3 file system, and it was because all my music is ripped in FLAC. Well, whenever you wanted to copy that or listen to that or whatever you were going to do, you select the MP3 file. It looked like a normal file system, even though it was virtual, and it would just do the conversion on the fly. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff where you can have multiple versions of formats that don't actually exist until you need them, and then convert as you go.
Yeah. One of the other ones that uses it that we've probably a lot of us used is SSHFS. And I don't know whether that is going to be applicable for a pass-through speed up or not, because that's doing some interesting things. But so I hope so. It would be neat to see as well.
Yeah, it's under the hood of a lot of things. So this is big news.
It is. It's really neat. All right. So we got a question in the chat room this past week, and we're going to do what we call a round table about it. And the questioner was the Chris Johnson, and he asks, he says he's attempting to write this in a way that makes it obvious that he is not trying to start a flame war. Well, we appreciate that. He's curious about what sort of features in the various desktop managers that are on Linux that people like and they choose that desktop manager for. He says he's found himself trying multiples like LXCE and GNOME and now Sway, which is i3 for Wayland. And he finds that they all fulfill the basic things he's looking for. And whichever DM the distro that he's using defaults to is usually the easiest and best supported. And his requirements are pretty simple requirements, actually. Keyboard shortcuts for being able to open a terminal. Keyboard shortcuts for being able to search and launch any graphical application. Multiple desktops and easy swapping between them, including moving windows between them, and keyboard shortcuts for positioning windows on a screen, in full screen, left, right half, the other monitor, etc. And then he wants to know, is there a killer feature of a specific desktop manager that you prefer that made you pick it? Now, I have answers, but I will let one of you guys jump in first and address this. Who goes first, and what do you think?
Well, since no one's jumping in, I'll jump in. For years, I really liked KDE just because it was so highly customizable. Mm-hmm. And I would, instead of changing desktop environments, I would just reconfigure my KDE all the time. And I'm always the kind of person, at least I was, I'd get a new phone, I get whatever, and I'd go through every single setting. And I did the same thing with my desktops. But I think as I get older, I just don't want to deal with that anymore as much. I was like, I don't have time. I just want to get on and, the short time I have left, I want to enjoy it. Hopefully a good 55 years but, left. But so I switched to GNOME a few years ago, and some things that I really like is, I like to be able to hit the super key and just type whatever app I'm looking for and then go to it. I really like the activity section. Also, that same spot when you hit the super key, everything backs out and shows all of your open windows at a quick glance. And I like a lot of the keyboard shortcuts, F12 to show Yaquake, which I always install. That's I guess not in most desktop environments, I guess. Manjaro had it by default, but I don't recall it being in anything else. And I think that was KDE's Manjaro. How do
you spell Yaquake? Is that Yakuake?
Q-U-A-K-E.
So there's a version of that spelled with a K that's actually part of KDE. And I think there is a Quake style drop down terminal emulator for just about all the desktops.
Yes. Yeah, I think the one for GNOME is with a Q. And then also the tiling stuff. So like the super key and arrows where I can move something to the left, to the right, up, whatever, full screen, and just quickly access. I like to be able to quickly do things with the keyboard. And another reason besides getting old and not wanting to configure everything, I'm going to bring this a little back to like my Windows and Mac usage in my other part of my life, I guess. Like at work, Windows is there. Mm-hmm. So obviously I've used it one form or another for decades. I would say it's only about 8 years ago, first time I actually used like a modern Mac. I guess I used them in school also decades ago, but a modern Mac, and the GNOME interface, it reminds me more of the Mac, and using that at work, I've really gotten kind of accustomed to it. And in general, what I like about Linux all across the board is you could take a desktop environment, you could take what you like with a Mac, what you like with a Windows, what you don't like, you can combine them and make them so it has exactly the desktop you like.
Yeah. Does GNOME have the equivalent of KWin scripts, where you can go in and write a plugin that adds your functionality that you're looking for?
I'm not familiar with KWin scripts. They have extensions, which there are some extensions that I frequently install, like showing the icons on the desktop, dash to panel. So that bottom panel will show on the desktop and not only in the activities display. And I don't even know I don't even have a list of what I normally install. This is one of those cases where I just go through every single one. It's like, hey, I'll take that one and I'll take that one.
Yeah. So the thing that comes to my mind is similar to the point you just made. These killer features that people are looking for, you can pretty much get them in any of the major desktop environments. Either they're there already, or there is, a plugin or a script that you can add to get them. So for example, the tiling. Like KDE has some tiling built into it. It's not a whole lot, but there are scripts, KWin scripts that you add. In fact, I use one. I use Mudir. It's a KWin script, and that's what gives me the keyboard shortcuts to be able to do tiling. And it's got kind of a killer feature itself. I'm not sure that I don't know if there's any other way to really get this, but you can tile and tell an application that you want it to act as if it's full screen inside its tile. So I can have, say, a YouTube video playing on the big screen behind me, and I can tell the YouTube video, hey, you're full screen. And then there's a couple of keyboard shortcuts you type in, and it will go to, 1/4 of your screen, but it takes up the entire quarter of the screen with video because it's still acting like it's full screen. And that's cool. That is cool. So you talk about killer features. That's kind of one of them for me. That's
a KWin script you can install.
Yeah, it's called Mudir, Mudeer.
You should just do that as a tip someday.
I think I have.
Really?
I have. We've talked about it a little bit in the past. All right, Jeff, what do you think? What is your killer feature for a desktop environment?
Mine isn't really as specific. It's just I'm a KDE user and I like the flexibility. I mean, there's times I go nuts with themes and whatnot and just mangle my desktop to see if it's going to work better a certain way or not. And, I have used GNOME. I've used LXCE. I've used what's the one with X? Was it XFCE?
XFCE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've used that one, and the others just seem like every once in a while I'll try to customize or do something and I just can't. And it's just the flexibility. Mm-hmm. For my desktop, I don't use a ton of keyboard shortcuts. I'm kind of really big into, and I hate to say it, I kind of make my quick or start menu look a lot like, Windows 7 or whatever, because I like the, start, click, and it's just right there. So it's kind of almost muscle memory when I'm loading something in. My keyboard shortcuts are, in things like browsers, in, spreadsheets, things like that. So, but I love the amount of flexibility to make KDE look like whatever I want.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's also fair to say that KDE kind of follows after that Windows paradigm, and GNOME sort of follows after the Mac OS paradigm. That's probably a statement that one could make fairly accurately.
I was going to say,
I kind of feel like there may be a little bit of borrowing that goes the other way too. Like there's some KDE features that have shown up in Windows and some GNOME features, I think, that have shown up in Mac OS.
Well, I mean, how long did it take Windows to get to the point where you could grab, like, on your taskbar, you could grab something and move it around where you wanted it?
It seems like a while.
Yeah, I mean, it took forever. If you wanted your programs in a certain order, you better start them in that certain order. And
I didn't know you could move them, but I guess you're more the Windows guy, so I was gonna say though, also, as far as like some of those other older style, I don't know what you want to call them, the other desktop environments, XFCE, LXQt, Mate, Cinnamon. A lot of them I've only dabbled in, XFCE I've ran on my Pinebook. I ran that because it was faster than whatever came with the Pinebook. But like Mate, I briefly used that for a while, and I really liked it for a while. And I thought that was very customizable. It's been several years, but I remember when you first install it, you pick a theme and you make it look like GNOME, Mac, Windows. It was similar-ish, and you select, and then you have a starting point. And I don't know if you can go all in like the KWin style things and just do anything you want, but you had a good starting point at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting stuff.
And
go ahead.
Well, I was just saying one thing too. I think KDE I do like is it does have a bad rap for being huge, but I don't think it's been bloated since version 4. Well, I mean, 4 wasn't very good, but now in 5, it's running much leaner than, and to me, it's like I have all the features and I don't see much of a benefit over some of the lighter desktops, like your LXCEs, XFCEs that are supposed to be super lightweight. And maybe if I was running on super critically small hardware, but I don't have any of that stuff left. Mm-hmm. So KDE works in 10-year-old machines perfectly for me.
Yeah, I haven't done my own testing on it, but what I keep hearing, at least over the last couple of years, is that KDE is a lot lighter now. I'm pretty sure I've heard people say it's like on par with XFCE as far as lightness. I don't know if that's So,
especially if you go in and turn off compositing and some of the wobbly windows and all those features, I think you can get it down pretty light.
And I have seen that testing. It is down to where it's very lightweight if you want it to be.
Yeah. Speaking of killer features, we'd be remiss to not talk about the fact that KDE 6 is the first time on Linux that you can now have native HDR. Now, the places where you can use it are still fairly limited, but it's there and it works. There's a flag a series of flags actually you can send into the M player to MPV, and it will play back HDR videos. I know there's at least one developer that is looking at Chromium and trying to figure out how to make Chromium work with the KDE 6 HDR stuff. And I imagine once it lands in Chromium, it won't be too long before it'll show up in Chrome, because that's just how that stuff happens to work. So fun stuff ahead and some fun stuff there now. So when you want to talk killer features, that's definitely one of them to think about.
I'll be giving KDE 6 a real serious shot one of these days, especially since I know it is officially available in OpenSUSE. Mm-hmm. I forgot who he is, but somebody on Mastodon reminded me that begins with a B, but he sent me a message. He did send a message. I think he probably tagged you in too, Jonathan, asking who mentioned KDE 6.
Yeah, I think I remember that
or something.
I don't know. I would tell you once Fedora 40, in fact, you could do it now, but once Fedora 40 goes stable, that would be the place to look at it. A lot of cool stuff happening there.
KDE Neon has it as well. They have now released that.
KDE Neon, this is going to sound terrible, but it's true. KDE Neon has this terrible problem that it's based on Ubuntu. And I don't say that. No, hang on. I don't say that to slam Ubuntu.
Stop there.
I don't say that to slam Ubuntu. It's based on Ubuntu LTE, which is the
LTS.
LTS, thank you. So LTE is 5G. That's something totally different. It's based on Ubuntu LTS. It's going to be based on 24.04, which is not going. 24.04 itself is not going to have KDE 6. It's going to be stuck in KDE 5, and so KDE Neon is just not going to be the same polished experience that you're going to get from a full-fledged distro that actually has KDE 6 support. Yeah, it's a problem, and I'm not sure what the KDE guys are going to do about it. But KDE Neon is not going to be great for a while.
I don't know why it wouldn't be. I mean, if Fedora 40 is, because Neon's where they do their development. So you have your nightly builds, you have your testing, and then you have your stable. Your stable, I want to say they released Neon. The latest Neon is now Plasma 6.
Let me put it this way. I grabbed back when KDE 6 was in alpha or beta, I wanted to check it out. And so I grabbed the KDE Neon, and KDE Neon failed to boot all the way up to desktop. And I then went and grabbed Fedora Rawhide that had just pulled KDE 6 into it, and it booted up to desktop and had a much better experience. The old, and it's going to be a little bit better once 2404 finally comes out. You can get KDE Neon based on that. But the old kernel and the fact that Ubuntu is still shipping the 5. series it really is an albatross around the neck of KDE Neon.
Well, Ubuntu, but KDE Neon, I guess what I'm saying is they yank out all the desktop stuff from, they add their own desktop. So the whole idea is they grab something stable from Ubuntu so that when they run into bugs, they know it's the desktop environment, not other parts of the operating system.
Yes and no. So it's kind of like that same deal where certain virtual machines would not run KDE 6, right? Because KDE 6 is new enough that it's putting pressure on the rest of your system. And so if you're trying to run KDE 6 with a 2-year-old kernel, like you would get from Ubuntu 22.04, there are things that are just not there. There are things that are not ready. And so you actually get a really high maintenance burden on the KDE people to try to make KDE Neon work. And I also don't know that it's entirely accurate to say that all of their development happens on KDE Neon. I think a lot of them are doing development on whatever system they've got. It's not necessarily Neon based. But I say this because I've done a little bit of hanging out with some of the people working on KDE, and I made that statement that it probably won't matter. And they're like, no, it's a huge pain that Ubuntu is not going to KDE 6. It's definitely going to make our lives harder. So that's kind of a straight from the horse's mouth sort of statement.
No, I could see the kernel part of it.
Yeah, and I was sort of surprised.
And some of the supporting libraries. I
was sort of surprised to hear that. But you think about it, like how many libraries are not actually part of KDE, but they're going to make, you got the kernel, you've got Mesa, you've got all the SDL libraries. There's a lot of stuff that's not like technically part of your desktop environment, but that it relies on very, very directly. So, okay, let's get into tips. We have roundtabled enough. Let's get into tips. Rob is up first. What is CF Disk?
CF Disk. So I know I mentioned this briefly on the show a long time ago, or not that long ago, when you were talking about F Disk.
Mm-hmm.
And I had pointed out that I prefer CF Disk because even though it's in the command line, it is GUI-ish.
It's a TUI.
It's TUI. Yeah. So that's what it is. So simple command. Just I think it's probably going to be in all the system. I've never had to install it anywhere. It's just been there. So CF Disk. If you do that, it brings up the TUI GUI interface, and it shows you for whatever reason my OpenSUSE left 1 megabit of free space there. But it has my 300 megabits for my EFI, has my 931 gig for my Linux drive there. And, it's really just as simple as if you got free space, you just navigate that menu on the bottom there, hit enter on new, fill out what you want. If you want to resize, you can go to it and you can resize. I'm not going to resize it, but it's simple as hitting enter and then typing that in, and you can change the type here, all with arrows navigating around. And when you have it all set how you want it, you hit enter on the right, and then you quit out of there, and it's much easier. Cool. You don't have to remember all the fdisk commands and flags and everything.
Yeah, that is cool. I like it. I will, next time I go to do something, I will try to remember to grab it and use it, because that does look pretty neat.
It's only one more letter you got to type just to see in front of F disk.
Yep. Should be simple. Why can't you remember it? It should be easy. All right. Jeff is up next. What do you have, sir?
So I don't have a specific tool. I have a link to an article in TechMint that talks about the 8 best open source disk cloning and backup tools for Linux 2024. So I'm not going to go through every single item, what it is, but there's, they go over, for example, Clonezilla, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. Mondo Rescue, which is a Linux disaster recovery solution. We have Part Image, so you have a Linux disk cloning utility. You have FSA Archiver, so file system archiver for Linux, and each one of these, they go through, what it does, what it supports, features, things like that. So definitely check out the link, the article in the show notes. I mean, there's Part Clone, Linux partition image tool. There is G4L, Linux disk imaging tool. So that one's a live CD that you can use. Do Clone, which is another disk cloning tool. And for example, they've got Time Shift in there as well, which is a backup and restore tool. So just thought I would give a lot of love to various disk issues that could come your way, and preventative things you could do to keep from losing your data when that spinning rust or those electrons just don't cooperate like they should.
Indeed. Very useful list. I am still personally partial to DD Rescue. In fact, I've got a customer's computer on the floor, right over there, down over there on the floor. And it's probably done by now. Hopefully it's done by now. Using DD Rescue to transfer from a 1 terabyte spinning rust drive to a 1 terabyte Micron SSD. So, woohoo! Yeah, I'm gonna go in tomorrow afternoon. It's funny. They're like, yeah, so you can have it back first thing on Monday, right? Like, I'm not a morning person. How about we meet over here Sunday afternoon? Like, oh, fine. Look, I've got kids. I've got 3 kids. There's a decent chance that I will be awake in the middle of the night, and trying to be here at 8:00 on Monday morning is just, let's just not. Anyway, all right.
I agree.
Yeah. So it's a very file system hard drive centric set of tips, because I have one as well. And I've been going through this process, basically recounting for you guys the process of growing a virtual hard disk in a virtual machine. So last week we finished the actual growing. Well, so the first week we enlarged the .img on the file on the host file system, and then I believe last week we went in and changed the partition size inside that virtual machine. Well, now we need to change the physical volume size, because we're working with an LVM here, logical volume management. So the next step, the next layer of the onion, as it were, is PV resize. And there is a kind of a gotcha here that I ran into a couple of times. And that is, you may want to, as you're doing this and thinking about it, you may think, oh, I need to use Kpart X to go ahead and map these. Well, following these steps, no, you don't want to do that. And in fact, it'll cause you problems if you do. You should have a /dev/loop0p2 device, and you just have to run PV resize. So PV resize space -v, and then on that device, and it should give you a readout and set, it finds it does its thing, and at the end it'll say, 1 device resized, 0 devices not resized. That's what you're looking for. And then after you run that, you can do, I think it's a PV info. Is it PV info? PV display. That's the one. You can do a PV display afterwards and see what your logical volume looks like, or your physical volume actually looks like now. So PV resize, and then I'll go ahead and add that PV display to take a look at it. So that is the next step. It is a ridiculous number of steps when you have logical volume management in the mix, but I'm documenting it here, and we will all know the next time it happens. All right. Well, guys, it's been fun. We're to the end, though, and I imagine that each of you has something that you want to plug or cover or recite here at the end. We'll let Jeff go first, who may have something to recite. We'll see.
I do. I don't have anything important, so it's just Poetry Corner again. My one for today is: the Tao that is seen is not the true Tao until you bring fresh toner. Have a great week, everybody.
All right, Rob.
Just my usual. Come connect with me at robertpcampbell.com over here, down there. And on that page, you can find links to my LinkedIn, Mastodon, or a spot to donate a coffee to me. And if you donate that coffee, we can meet up here on Discord. I can drink that coffee and we can hang out and be friends.
There you go. All right. Very cool. And from me, the only thing that I will mention, of course, is don't forget Hackaday. Hackaday.com. There's /floss, which is the free Libre and open source software podcast. And there's also the security article that goes live every Friday. If you haven't checked it out, I've got a YouTube channel as well. And the main things that's happening over there is news about Meshtastic. And that's the project that I'm up to my eyeballs in at the moment. I'm sure at some point my interest in that will wane and I will go on to something else. But for now, Meshtastic is where it's at. So if you would like to up some videos, the channel URL, did I just freeze Chrome? I tried to open up. I may have frozen Chrome. Fun. Anyway, I think it's JP_Bennett or the JP Bennett. I literally have frozen Chrome, so I can't tell, but try to put it in the show notes. That's what we'll do. All right. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you to everyone that caught us live and those that caught us on the download. We appreciate you all. Thanks for being here. And we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show. Hey, did you enjoy the show but really wish you could have more? Maybe see our smiling faces or be able to chat with us in Discord during the show? You need to check out Club TWiT. It's also how you get the ad-free version of this show and all of the others. It is a measly $7 a month, and I tell you, it is worth it. Go check out Club TWiT. It's twit.tv/Club TWiT. Join today.